Bloodborne, a game by the Japanese developer From Software, is a spiritual successor to FromSoft's Dark Souls series. Both titles are known for their unique method of exposition, focusing on environmental storytelling and elusive item descriptions, and allowing the player to fill in the blanks according to their own interpretations. As an example of environmental storytelling, your player character starts off the game wearing an outfit with visible buttons. Depending on whether you pick a male or female character, your outfit has buttons on either the right or left side. Later in the game, one character is in disguise as a beggar, but his buttons are on the wrong side for a man, suggesting that he's wearing whatever discarded clothes he can get his hands on. In order to get into the game's dialogue with the real-world issues, I'd like to explore one of the most complex and enigmatic characters in Bloodborne, a man called Laurence. The basic plot of Bloodborne is that you have arrived at a city called Yharnam somewhere in Eastern or Central Europe, seeking healing from a sickness or injury using the miraculous blood that the healing church in Yharnam possesses. Unfortunately, the church's healing blood also causes a certain bloodlust that eventually escalates until people who have received blood transfusions from the church literally transform into beasts. Your player character is addressed as the Good Hunter, and your job is to hunt down these beasts and kill them. Later, the game takes a Lovecraftian turn as you discover that the University of Byrgenwerth was behind the formation of the Healing Church, and the city of Yharnam is one giant science experiment aiming to use the blood to turn human beings into gods. Laurence was the father of the Healing Church and seems to be about the equivalent of St. Peter, the first pope in Catholic tradition. He was originally a scholar at the University of Byrgenwerth studying the blood, and when the technique of blood ministration turned out to result in turning men into beasts, which appear to have been an unforeseen consequence, he doubled down on his efforts to elevate mankind, eventually forming the Healing Church in order to spread blood ministration in hopes that someone out there would manage to overcome it and become a god, as well as resorting to actions such as assassination to keep the Healing Church's secrets, and abandoning and burning the section of the city where the beast plague first appeared. He seemed to believe that the only way out was through. So what makes Laurence an interesting character, and what does that have to do with the rhetoric of the game? Well, if the game could be said to have a villain at all, Laurence might be the one. Still, in spite of his actions, he's portrayed in a fascinating way. He's soft-spoken and empathetic, and the level of love and devotion other characters express towards him is unparalleled in the game.
Oh, Laurence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid.
Laurence's item descriptions are also sympathetic to him. He's described as failing to protect something, likely the people of Yharnam, and an item you can loot from him is called the Gentle Beast Rune, engineered as a better way of controlling the beast plague than outright murdering the monsters that used to be men, framing Laurence as a protective and gentle person himself, one who is interested in saving lives. Still, Laurence's crimes are obvious to any player of the game. The city of Yharnam is plagued with bloodthirsty chaos, most people are addicted to the blood transfusions that will eventually turn them into monsters, and both the hunters and the beasts are doomed to a hellish afterlife, where you eventually find Laurence transformed into a beast himself and literally burning for his sins. In a subtler example, the zombies in the sewer in Yharnam have the same moveset that Laurence displays at one point during his boss fight, reminding the player, or perhaps Laurence himself, of the grotesque things he's responsible for. He's being forced to live out each one of his sins in the afterlife, experiencing the suffering he's caused for himself. And so we come to one of the key themes of Bloodborne, the concept of accountability and original sin.
Curse the fiends, their children too. And their children forever true.
The hunters are said to carry the legacy of Byrgenwerth's first sin, hinted to be the murder of a god from which they harvested the healing blood. Still, the people who receive blood ministration, including your player character, are doing it out of desperation in order to find healing from chronic or terminal conditions. And even though they probably knew that they were going to get addicted to the blood and turn into a violent monster, they were actively prevented from knowing that they'd inherit that sin. Because you yourself received a transfusion at the beginning of the game and continue to use the blood to maintain your health during fights, the game never asks you to believe that the people seeking blood ministration are entirely bad, much like it stresses that Laurence's intentions weren't entirely malicious, and you might even be tempted to call him a decent and well-meaning person. But still, the sin exists, and they have to pay. And so we've gotten down to the very bottom of it. Bloodborne is a game that asks you how far you need to go to hold people responsible for their sins. Procedurality comes into play when you encounter Laurence burning in the afterlife. Although framed as being a possible climax to the DLC or even the entire game, his boss fight is entirely optional. It's also unique among the boss fights in that the player has to make a decision about whether or not they want to bring him the item that will trigger it. In fact, because of the item description, the player might even initially believe that they're helping Laurence by bringing it to him. Throughout the game, Bloodborne tells you that you're setting characters free by killing them.
Laurence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.
By making the boss fight optional, the game is asking you what you believe about sins, intentions, and punishments. Do you want Laurence to continue to burn in the afterlife, or do you want him to find peace? You want the chance to hack into him and make him pay in pain and blood. What exactly do you think he deserves? Of course, some people just want the XP and a fun boss fight. This is one drawback Bogost doesn't really deal with in his text on procedural rhetoric. The idea that some people will just engage with games with a message for entertainment, and not actively think about them. Especially games where the themes are subtle or embedded in such a dense text as Bloodborne. Also, some people might trigger Laurence's boss fight just because it seems to be what the game wants them to do, and the thing they're supposed to do next, without realizing or caring that their player character is making a motivated choice in universe. So I could just be making mountains out of molehills, and the game never expected anyone to enter the kind of dialogue with it the way I did when I decided that my character would attack Laurence. But I believe that the way Laurence and his boss fight are framed are meant to embody the game's deepest themes, whether the player chooses to engage with them or not.